Okay, my presentation is on aerobic high intensity intervals are superior to improved VO2 max compared with sprint intervals in well-trained men. So we know that VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen our body can use at maximal exercise. And so if we have an improved VO2 max, then we can increase speed and capacity in our running. So these researchers wanted to determine if a high aerobic intensity training or an overall intensity training would be better for these endurance runners. So they hypothesized that the HIIT training would be much better than sprint training because HIIT training is in charge of the aerobic intensity. And so they determined that in these circumstances, HIIT training would be better for these runners. So we had a handful of men, 48 of those. They are not specialized professional runners, but they volunteered to come and participate in this study. 9 of them at the end of the test had dropped out due to injuries that were not related or just gave no reason. But they were done 3 times each week for 8 weeks. These tests were, and the participants were asked to refrain from participating in other high intensity endurance training during the study, but they were able to do, like, if they wanted to go play pickleball or soccer with their friends, then they were able to do that. They just were advised not to do the whole extra stuff that improves endurance training. The VO2 max training was done by randomly separating these participants into 3 different trial groups. The HIIT 4x4 minute at 95% maximal aerobic speed, the SIT 8x20 second at a 150% max aerobic speed, and the SIT 10x30 second, 175% max aerobic speed. Each of these had a couple of breaks in between each set, so the 4x4 in the HIIT training. So they'd exercise for 4 minutes and then they'd have a 3 minute active break period. For the sprint interval training, they had 10 seconds of passive breaks, and then the second sprint interval training group had 3.5 minute active breaks. And so they measured VO2 max and a couple of other things during the study to be able to determine a couple of things. So like I said, the HIIT interval trainings allow for overload in the organs for the transport of oxygen during the training, and then the rest took out the byproducts produced during the interval before they begin again. They had about 10 participants in this one. The velocity was adjusted to reach the target heart rate during each interval so that they had accurate results. And like I said, they did 4 intervals for 4 minutes with 3 minute active recovery periods. The sprint interval training, this one is known to increase VO2 max, but like I said before, they think that the HIIT interval training is going to do more for them. This allows for a higher intensity at a higher metabolic volume. 12 men finished the 8x20 and then 9 finished the 10x30 second. So for the 8x20, if the participants reached a ninth interval, then the velocity was increased so that they could continue to hit their max. And then that one, like I said before, is a 10-second passive rest before they started their next set. In the 10x30 second group, the workload was determined by a 300-meter sprint that I'll talk about in a minute, and then reduced if they needed to make it the whole 30 seconds of exercise and they were having a hard time finishing that. So they had active rest periods for about 3.5 minutes. And to determine that each person was running at maximal speed, they had continuous communication and motivation. Okay, on day one, they used treadmills during this whole test. They used the treadmills, and each of them were set or tested for their set point heart rate and VO2 max. They took blood samples for the blood lactate levels, and then they found the lactate threshold and used that during the rest of their tests to make sure that they were at the correct intensity. Um, Day two, they got a maximum aerobic speed and made sure that their VO2 max was their actual VO2 max in a different test so that they can make sure that everything was accurate. Day three, each participant sprinted the 300 meters, like I mentioned, and then they rested for half an hour, then ran about 2 miles. And so they did that to determine a sprint speed and so the anaerobic and the aerobic abilities of each of these participants. And then the last day before they started the testing is they took their blood samples to get a couple of things to help in their testing. Okay, so after they had done all of the pre-testing, they went through into the testing whether they were in the HIT or the SIT groups, and they measured things and analyzed things, and these were the results. So those who participated in the high intensity interval training and the sprint interval training for the 8 by 20 seconds had increases in VO2 max, but HIT in comparison had much higher uh, maximum oxygen uptake. As far as our anaerobic capacity from pre to post test, the SIT 8 by 10 group had a increase, but they didn't find a big increase for the other two groups. Our aerobic performance had an improved, well, all of the groups had an improved 3,000 meter time and 300 meter time, but the HIT caused better endurance running times. So they were improved, all of them, but the HIT did get better endurance, and the sprint times obviously were better in the sprint interval trainings. The bicarbonate concentration that they measured in the pre and the post, they saw that there was more in the HIT, but they aren't attributing any good buffering capacity in every circumstance because that is not usually a finding in previous studies. So though they found that, they didn't know if that was just something that happened, I guess. So they're not claiming that to happen in every single HIT circumstance. And then their lactate threshold, because they were trained runners, they didn't find any improved thresholds as the VO2 max improved. Okay, so like I said, their theory was correct that HIT is best for improving VO2 max and overall performance. But I would argue that in both HIT and sprint interval trainings, it'd be good for a well-rounded athlete because different parts of your course are going to require different things, or different parts of your sport are going to require anaerobic and aerobic performance. But if you are doing an endurance performance emphasis training, on HIT is the best. And to reemphasize, aerobic intensity, not overall intensity, is best for improving VO2 max in these trained athletes. And something they did note is that in the sprint interval training, by 8 by 20 seconds, they didn't have long enough recovery times to establish different intervals in the training, so the body felt like it was always in the constant stress. And then in the 10 by 30, it had too long of an active recovery period to allow for aerobic intensity to stay up as high as it needed to during the intervals. So in conclusion, this can allow for higher trained athletes to select more suitable interval training formats to see improvements. So when they're looking and they're thinking, oh, I need to improve this aspect of my performance, if I need to be better at running for longer periods of time during my plays, then they could use HIIT training and they would see that improvement in VO2 max. And then improvements in our anaerobic capacity obviously is through the sprint training because of the higher overall intensity with shorter rest periods. And that is my article. Thank you.